Farida didn't see the slap coming. One moment she was holding out a small plate of food to a trembling old beggar. The next she was on the ground, her cheek burning as her mother-in-law's voice cut through the air like a blade. "In this house we don't feed dirt," Mama Zainab spat, forcing Farida to her knees in front of watching neighbors. Rain began to fall as the old man was dragged out and thrown onto the street. Then suddenly, a sleek black car stopped at the gate. The engine didn't turn off, and someone inside was watching everything. "Where are you watching from and what time is it there?" Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this. Farida had learned very early in life that silence could sometimes be the only shield a person had. In the Bellows household, silence was not just a habit, it was survival. The house itself stood tall in one of the wealthier parts of Lagos, a sprawling compound with high cream-colored walls topped with sharp iron spikes. The gates were always guarded, the floors always polished, and every corner of the home carried the scent of wealth carefully maintained. Marble tiles reflected light like mirrors, and expensive furniture sat untouched more for display than comfort. But for Farida, none of it felt like home. She had entered this house 2 years ago, as Yusuf Bellows' bride, carrying nothing but a small suitcase and a heart full of hope. She believed, perhaps foolishly, that love could bridge the gap between her humble beginnings and Yusuf's privileged world. She had been wrong. From the very first day, Mama Zainab Bellows made it clear that Farida did not belong. "Some girls marry into wealth," she had said coldly during their first dinner together. "Others only enter it. Never confuse the two." The words had stayed with Farida, ever since echoing in her mind, during the quiet moments when she sat alone in the large echoing rooms. Yusuf had heard those words that night. He said nothing. That silence had grown over time, slowly, almost invisibly, until it became the loudest presence in their marriage. At first, Yusuf had been kind, gentle even. He would sit with Farida in the evenings asking about her day, sharing small stories from his work. He would smile, and sometimes he would laugh. But as months passed, that warmth faded. His conversations became shorter, his smiles rarer. And when his mother spoke especially about Farida, he would lower his gaze as if the ground beneath his feet had suddenly become far more interesting than the woman he had chosen to marry. Farida noticed everything. She noticed how he no longer defended her when Mama Zainab criticized her cooking. She noticed how he stayed silent when guests laughed softly at her simple accent. She noticed how he avoided her eyes when she tried to speak about how she felt. And yet she said nothing, because Farida knew something about losing everything. She had grown up without parents, raised by neighbors who had barely enough for themselves. There had been nights when she went to sleep, hungry mornings when she walked barefoot to places she hoped might offer her a chance to work, to earn to survive. Kindness had been the only thing that kept her alive back then. A woman who shared her last piece of bread. A man who gave her water without asking for anything in return. A stranger who once covered her with a cloth during a cold night. Those moments had shaped her. They had taught her that even in a world that could be cruel, small acts of compassion mattered, and no matter how much Mama Zainab tried to strip that away from her, Farida refused to let go of it, even if it meant suffering. That afternoon, the house was unusually quiet. The sun hung high in the sky, casting sharp shadows across the compound. Most of the household staff moved quietly through their routines, careful not to draw attention. In a place like this, being invisible was often safer than being noticed. Farida stood in the kitchen, carefully arranging plates for lunch. The smell of jollof rice filled the air rich and warm, but her hands moved with a precision that came not from joy, but from caution. Every detail mattered. Too much salt, Mama Zainab would complain. Too little spice, she would insult her upbringing. Too slow, she would call her lazy. Farida had learned to anticipate every possible criticism, adjusting herself constantly, hoping perhaps in vain that one day it would be enough. Farida. The voice came sharp and sudden, cutting through the quiet like a crack of thunder. Farida froze for a brief second, before quickly wiping her hands and stepping out of the kitchen. "Yes, Mama," she said softly, lowering her gaze as she approached. Mama Zainab sat in the living room, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. She was dressed elegantly as always, her headscarf perfectly wrapped her jewelry, catching the light with every slight movement. There was power in the way she sat. Power and control. "We have guests coming this evening," she said. "Important people." Farida nodded. "Yes, Mama. I don't want any embarrassment." The words were simple, but the meaning behind them was heavy. Farida understood immediately. She was the potential embarrassment. "I will make sure everything is perfect," Farida replied. Mama Zainab studied her for a moment, her eyes scanning Farida from head to toe, as if assessing something of little value. "Make sure you stay out of sight unless you are needed," she added. "And when you are needed, speak only when spoken to." Farida swallowed quietly. "Yes, Mama." From the corner of the room, Aisha, the young housemaid, watched silently. There was something in her eyes, something uneasy, but she quickly looked away when Mama Zainab shifted slightly in her seat. "Where is Yusuf?" Mama Zainab asked. "He is in his study," Farida answered. "Tell him to come see me." "Yes, Mama." Farida turned and walked toward the hallway. Her steps measured, controlled. But inside, something stirred, something small but persistent. A question she had asked herself many times. How long? How long could she keep living like this? She reached Yusuf's study and knocked gently. "Come in." His voice responded from inside. Farida stepped in and found him seated behind a large desk, papers spread neatly before him. He looked up briefly, his expression neutral. "Mama is asking for you," she said. Yusuf nodded. "All right." There was a pause. Farida hesitated, her fingers tightening slightly at her sides. "Yusuf," she began softly. He looked at her again, this time with a faint impatience. "Yes." The words she wanted to say lingered on her lips. "Why don't you speak for me? Why do you let her treat me this way? Do I mean so little to you now?" But none of those words came out. Instead, she lowered her gaze. "Nothing," she said quietly. "I'll go back to the kitchen." Yusuf watched her for a brief moment, as if considering something, but then he simply nodded and returned his attention to the papers in front of him. Farida turned and walked out. Behind her, the door closed softly. And just like that, another moment passed unspoken, unresolved, quietly breaking something inside her that no one else could see. Back in the kitchen, Farida stood still for a moment, her hands resting against the counter. Then she took a slow breath and continued working. Because in a house like this, pain did not stop the day, it simply learned to hide. Farida had never expected life to be easy, but she had once believed it would at least be kind. That belief had been planted in her long before she ever stepped into the Bellows household, long before marble floors and cold stairs replaced the dusty roads and open skies of her childhood. She grew up in a small neighborhood on the outskirts of Ibadan, where houses leaned slightly into one another like tired companions, and the smell of cooking fires filled the air at dusk. There was no luxury there, no polished surfaces or guarded gates. But there was something else, something far more valuable. There was humanity. Farida never knew her parents. She was told they died when she was too young to remember, victims of an illness that moved quickly and left nothing behind. After that, she became what people often called everybody's child. It sounded warm, but it was not always easy. She moved from one home to another, sometimes staying for weeks, sometimes months. Some families were kind, offering her food and a place to sleep without question. Others were less patient, reminding her through words or silence that she was a burden they had not chosen. Still, Farida learned. She learned how to read people before they spoke. She learned when to stay quiet and when to offer help. She learned how to smile, even when her stomach ached from hunger. And, most importantly, she learned what it meant to be seen. Because on the days when someone looked at her not with pity but with genuine care, it changed everything. There was an old woman named Iyasade, who once shared her last bowl of porridge with Farida without hesitation. There is always enough, she had said with a gentle smile, even though Farida could see there wasn't. A mechanic named Kunle once let Farida sit in the shade of his workshop during a heat wave, handing her a bottle of water and saying nothing, as if kindness didn't need explanation. And there was one night, one she would never forget, when she fell asleep under a wooden stall in the market, shivering from the cold. When she woke up, someone had covered her with a thin cloth. She never found out who it was, but she remembered the feeling. Safe. Those moments shaped her in ways she could never fully explain. They taught her that even when the world seemed harsh, there were people who chose to be gentle. And she decided quietly that she would be one of them, no matter what. Years later, when Farida met Yusuf Bellows, she thought just for a moment that her life had finally turned a corner. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. She was working at a small roadside food stall, helping an elderly woman prepare meals for passing customers. Her hands moved quickly, skillfully, her voice soft but steady as she took orders and served plates. Yusuf had stopped there by chance. At least that was what he said. He was different from the men she was used to seeing. His clothes were simple but well made. His posture relaxed, his voice calm. He didn't speak down to her, didn't rush her, didn't look at her like she was invisible. He looked at her like she mattered. That alone was enough to catch her attention. He returned the next day, and the day after that. At first, their conversations were brief, just small exchanges over food. But slowly, they grew longer. He asked about her life, her dreams, her thoughts. And unlike others who asked out of curiosity, Yusuf listened. Truly listened. Farida found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected. She spoke about her childhood, her struggles, the people who had helped her along the way. Yusuf didn't interrupt. He didn't judge. He simply listened, his eyes steady, his expression thoughtful. And somewhere between those conversations, something began to grow, something fragile, something hopeful. When he told her he wanted to marry her, Farida was stunned. She knew who he was by then. A Bellows, a name that carried weight, a name that opened doors. She hesitated, not because she didn't care for him, but because she understood the world they lived in. She knew that people like her were not easily accepted into families like his. "Are you sure?" she had asked quietly. Yusuf smiled. "I don't care about what anyone else thinks." She wanted to believe him. So she did. The wedding was small but beautiful. For a brief moment, it felt like everything Farida had ever hoped for was finally within reach. But hope, she would later learn, could be very fragile. The first crack appeared the day she entered the Bellows compound as Yusuf's wife. Mama Zainab didn't greet her with warmth. She didn't even pretend. Instead, she looked at Farida with a gaze so cold, it seemed to strip away every layer of confidence Farida had built over the years. "This is the girl?" she asked, her voice flat. Yusuf nodded. "Yes, Mama." Mama Zainab's eyes lingered on Farida for a moment longer before she turned away. "We will talk later," she said. That later never really ended. From that day forward, Farida's life became a constant test. Every action was observed. Every mistake, no matter how small, was magnified. Every effort she made to belong was met with quiet rejection. At first, Yusuf tried to stand by her. He would defend her occasionally, speak gently to his mother, try to ease the tension. But Mama Zainab was not a woman who yielded easily. Her words were sharp, her expectations relentless, and her disapproval unwavering. "You cannot build a strong family on weak foundations," she told Yusuf one evening, her voice calm but firm. "And that girl, she comes from nothing." Yusuf didn't respond immediately, and in that silence, something shifted. Farida noticed it over time, the way he began to hesitate before speaking, the way he avoided conflict with his mother, the way his support slowly, almost imperceptibly, faded, until one day it was gone. Now as Farida stood alone in the quiet kitchen of the Bellow home, those memories felt distant and heavy at the same time. She wiped her hands, slowly, her mind drifting. There had been a time when she believed love would protect her. Now she understood something else. Love without courage could become silence, and silence could become distance. From the hallway she heard voices, Mama Zainab and Yusuf. They were speaking in low tones, but the house was quiet enough that some words carried. "This cannot continue," Mama Zainab was saying. Yusuf responded, but his voice was too soft to make out. "I warned you," she continued. "You chose her. Now you must deal with the consequences." Farida's heart tightened. She didn't mean to listen, but she couldn't walk away. "She embarrasses us," Mama Zainab added. "The way she speaks, the way she behaves. It is not fitting." There was a pause. Then, Yusuf spoke clearer this time. "I understand, Mama." 3 simple words, but they landed like a weight Farida could not lift. She stepped back quietly, her breath shallow. Something inside her, something she had been holding on to, shifted again. Not broken, not completely, but changed. She returned to the kitchen, her movements slower now, more deliberate. The house remained the same. The walls, the floors, the silence. But for Farida, something was different. She no longer wondered if she belonged. She already knew the answer. And yet, even with that truth settling in her chest, one thing remained unchanged. Her heart. Because somewhere deep inside, beneath the pain and the quiet humiliation, Farida still believed in something simple. That kindness mattered. That even in a place where she felt unseen, she could still choose to see others. And perhaps that choice would matter more than anything else. She didn't know yet how much it would cost her, but she was about to find out. The first time Farida saw him, she almost walked past. In a place like Lagos, especially near the wealthier districts, people learned quickly not to look too closely at suffering. It was everywhere, on the roadsides, near the gates of large homes, at the corners of busy streets where traffic slowed, just long enough for hands to stretch out in silent pleas. Most people had trained themselves not to see it. But Farida had never learned that skill. That afternoon she had been sent out to buy a few items from a nearby shop. It was a rare moment outside the compound, a brief escape from the heavy air that seemed to cling to the Bellow household. The sun was high, the heat pressing down against her skin as she walked quickly, her scarf pulled slightly over her head. She kept her gaze low-focused on the road ahead, until she noticed him. He sat near the edge of a cracked pavement, just a few steps away from a drainage channel. His clothes were worn beyond repair, layers of fabric that had long lost their original color. His hands trembled slightly as he tried to steady himself, and his breathing seemed uneven, as though each breath required effort. People passed him without slowing. Some glanced briefly, their expressions tightening before they looked away. Others didn't look at all. Farida slowed her steps. There was something about him. Not just the weakness in his body, but the quiet stillness in his eyes. He wasn't calling out, wasn't begging loudly like others sometimes did. He simply sat there watching the world move past him as if he no longer expected it to stop. Farida hesitated. Mama Zainab's voice echoed in her mind. "Do not bring shame to this house." Helping him could easily become a problem if anyone saw. She knew that. She understood the risk. But then she remembered something else. A thin cloth placed over her while she slept in the cold. A bowl of porridge shared without hesitation. A bottle of water handed to her on a scorching day. Kindness she had not earned. Kindness that had saved her. Her steps slowed to a stop. She turned back. The man looked up slightly as her shadow fell across him. For a brief moment their eyes met. His were tired, but not empty. "Are you hungry?" Farida asked softly. The question seemed to surprise him. He blinked as if unsure whether he had heard correctly. Farida crouched slightly, careful not to draw too much attention. "I don't have food with me right now." She continued, her voice gentle. "But I can bring some, if you wait here." The man studied her for a moment, his gaze searching her face as if trying to understand something deeper than her words. Then he nodded slowly. Farida gave a small, reassuring smile. "I will come back," she said. And she meant it. She hurried to the shop, completed her task as quickly as possible, and then made a decision that felt both small and significant. When she returned to the Bellows compound, she didn't go straight to the kitchen. Instead, she slipped quietly to the back where leftover food from lunch was often kept before being discarded. She hesitated for only a second. Then she took a small portion carefully so it wouldn't be noticed and placed it into a container. Her heart beat faster as she stepped back outside. Every movement felt heavier now, more dangerous, but she didn't stop. When she reached the same spot, the man was still there, waiting. Relief flickered across his face when he saw her. "You came back," he said, his voice rough but steady. Farida nodded, kneeling beside him as she handed over the food. "I said I would." He took the container carefully as though it were something fragile, something valuable. For a moment he didn't eat. He simply looked at it. Then slowly, he began. Farida watched quietly, her chest tightening slightly as she saw the way his hands trembled, not just from weakness but from something deeper. Gratitude. "What is your name?" she asked gently. He paused, then looked up at her. "Kareem," he said. "People used to call me Baba Kareem." Farida smiled softly. "I'm Farida." He nodded. "Farida," he repeated as if committing it to memory. There was a brief silence between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was calm. Grounded. "You shouldn't be here long," Farida said after a moment, glancing around. "The guards from nearby houses. They don't like people staying." Baba Kareem gave a faint, knowing smile. "I have learned that," he said. Farida hesitated again. Then she reached into the small pouch she carried and took out a little money, barely enough to make a difference, but something. She placed it gently beside him. "It's not much," she said. Baba Kareem looked at it, then at her. "You have already given more than enough," he replied. Farida shook her head slightly. "It's okay." He studied her again, that same searching look in his eyes. "You are not like the others," he said quietly. Farida lowered her gaze, unsure how to respond. "I am just doing what someone once did for me," she said after a moment. Baba Kareem nodded slowly, as if that answer meant more than she realized. "Then the world is not entirely lost," he murmured. Farida smiled faintly, but she knew she couldn't stay long. "I have to go," she said, standing up. Baba Kareem inclined his head slightly. "Thank you, Farida." She hesitated for just a second longer. "Will you be here tomorrow?" she asked. He looked out toward the road, then back at her. "If God allows," he said. Farida nodded. "Then I will come back." As she walked away, her steps felt lighter. Not because her life had changed, not because the weight she carried had disappeared, but because for a brief moment she had stepped outside of it. She had done something that felt right, something that reminded her of who she was before the Bellows house tried to redefine her. The next day she returned, and the day after that. Each time she brought a little food. Sometimes they spoke. Other times they simply sat in silence, sharing the quiet understanding that didn't need words. Baba Karim spoke rarely, but when he did, his words carried a strange depth. "People think wealth is what you hold," he said once, "but often it is what you are willing to give." Farida thought about that for a long time. She didn't realize that someone else had started thinking too. From the balcony of a nearby house, partially hidden behind drawn curtains, a pair of eyes watched the quiet exchanges, observed, measured, and, slowly, quietly, decided to act. Inside the Bellows compound, Aisha stood by the kitchen window one afternoon, her gaze fixed on the road outside. She had seen Farida leave again, and this time she had followed just far enough to understand. Her heart tightened as she watched Farida kneel beside the old man, offering him food, with the same quiet care she showed in everything she did. Aisha swallowed. She knew what would happen if Mama Zainab found out. She knew exactly how it would end. And for a moment she hesitated, but fear had a way of speaking louder than conscience. She turned away from the window and walked toward the main house, each step heavier than the last. By the time she reached Mama Zainab's sitting room, her decision had already been made. She knocked softly. "Come in," the familiar voice called. Aisha stepped inside, her hands clasped tightly together. "Mama," she began, her voice uncertain. Mama Zainab looked up, her eyes sharp. "What is it?" Aisha hesitated, just for a second. Then she spoke. "It is about Farida." And in that moment, without fully realizing it, she set something into motion that none of them would be able to stop. By the time Farida returned to the Bellows compound that evening, something felt different. The air was heavier, still, like the house itself was holding its breath. She stepped through the gate, slowly adjusting her scarf, her fingers still faintly carrying the warmth of the container she had just handed to Baba Karim. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to hold on to that feeling, the quiet peace, the simple rightness of what she had done. But it didn't last. "Farida." The voice cracked through the compound like a whip. Farida froze. Her heart dropped instantly. "Mama Zainab." She turned slowly. Mama Zainab stood in the center of the courtyard, surrounded by two house staff and one of the neighbors who had come visiting earlier. Her posture was rigid, her eyes sharp with something far more dangerous than anger. Disgust. "Come here," she said. Farida's feet felt heavy as she walked forward, each step echoing faintly against the tiled ground. She could feel the eyes on her, now watching, waiting. Judging. "Yes, Mama," she said softly, lowering her gaze. Mama Zainab didn't respond immediately. Instead, she took a slow step forward, studying Farida's face as if searching for confirmation of something she already believed. "Where were you?" she asked. "I went to buy the items you asked for," Farida replied carefully. Mama Zainab's lips curved slightly, not into a smile but something colder. And after that, Farida hesitated, just for a second, but that was enough. Aisha stood a few steps behind, her eyes fixed on the ground. "Answer me," Mama Zainab said, her voice rising. Farida swallowed. "I was on my way back," she said quietly. The sound came before the pain, a sharp crack that echoed through the courtyard. Farida's head snapped to the side as Mama Zainab's hand struck her face. For a moment, everything blurred. The world tilted, and then, slowly, painfully, it came back into focus. The burning on her cheek, the silence around her, the eyes watching. "You lie to me," Mama Zainab's voice cut through the air, trembling with fury. "In my own house," Farida's breath came shallow. I didn't mean," Another slap, this time harder. Farida staggered, barely catching herself before she fell. "You think I don't know, Mama Zainab," continued her voice rising, now drawing more attention. "You think you can sneak around and disgrace this family?" Farida's chest tightened. Her eyes flickered briefly toward Aisha. The truth settled in instantly. "She has been feeding a beggar," Mama Zainab announced loudly, turning slightly so the others could hear. "Taking food from this house and giving it to a filthy man on the street." A murmur spread among the small group. Farida felt it like a weight pressing down on her. "I was only trying to help," she began, her voice trembling. "Help," Mama Zainab snapped. "Help who people like that are not your responsibility." Farida shook her head weakly. He was hungry. And so Mama Zainab stepped closer, her eyes blazing. "There are hungry people everywhere. Will you bring all of them into this house?" "No, Mama." "I then why him?" Mama Zainab demanded. Farida opened her mouth, but no words came. Because the answer was simple. Because he needed it. But in this moment, that truth felt small, powerless against the storm in front of her. Mama Zainab turned sharply toward one of the guards standing near the gate. "Bring that man here," she ordered. Farida's heart stopped. "No, please," she said quickly, stepping forward. "Mama, there's no need." Silence. Farida fell quiet instantly. The guard hesitated for only a second before moving out. Time stretched, each second heavier than the last. Farida's hands trembled at her sides, her mind racing, her heart pounding so loudly she could hear it in her ears. "Please," she thought silently, "please let him leave." But it was too late. A few minutes later, the gate opened again, and Baba Karim was dragged inside. He stumbled as the guard pushed him forward, his frail body struggling to keep balance. His eyes darted around, confused, alarmed, but when they landed on Farida, something shifted. "Understanding. Is this the man?" Mama Zainab asked coldly. No one answered. They didn't need to. The evidence was standing right there. Mama Zainab walked slowly toward Baba Karim, her expression hard. "So this is where our food has been going," she said. Baba Karim said nothing. He simply stood there, his shoulders slightly hunched, his breathing uneven. "You," she continued, her voice sharp, "who gave you permission to sit near this house?" He looked at her calmly. "I did not ask for permission," he said quietly. Mama Zainab's eyes narrowed. "And yet you take what does not belong to you." Farida stepped forward suddenly. "I gave it to him," she said, her voice breaking. "Please, Mama, he didn't do anything wrong." Another sharp sound. This time, Mama Zainab didn't slap her face. She shoved her, hard. Farida fell to her knees on the cold tile, the impact sending a jolt through her body. "Stay down," Mama Zainab snapped. Farida's breath caught, but she didn't resist. She couldn't. "Look at you," Mama Zainab continued, her voice dripping with contempt. "Defending this man over your own family." "He is just hungry," Farida whispered. "And you are just foolish," Mama Zainab shot back. She turned back to the guard. "Take him out," she said. "Throw him back where he belongs." The guard moved immediately, grabbing Baba Karim's arm. Farida looked up, panic flashing across her face. "Please," she said, her voice cracking as she reached out. "Don't hurt him." Baba Karim glanced at her one last time, and in his eyes there was no anger, no fear, only something quiet, something steady. "It is all right," he said softly. The guard dragged him toward the gate. Farida watched helpless, her vision blurring as tears filled her eyes. "No," she whispered. But no one listened. The gate opened, and Baba Karim was pushed out into the street. The sound of it closing echoed louder than anything else. Silence followed, heavy, unforgiving. Farida remained on her knees, her body trembling, her cheeks still burning, her chest tight with something too deep to name. Mama Zainab looked down at her. "You will stay there," she said, coldly, "until you understand what you have done." Farida didn't move. She couldn't, because in that moment it wasn't just the pain in her body that held her there. It was something deeper, the realization that kindness, something she had always believed in, had just cost her everything she still had left in this house. And yet, even now as tears slipped silently down her face, one thought remained. She did not regret it. Not even for a second. Beyond the gate, unnoticed by those inside, a black car sat quietly by the roadside. The engine was still running, and behind the tinted window, someone had seen everything. The rain began slowly. At first it was only a light drizzle, soft drops that darkened the dust on the ground and settled gently on the iron gates of the Bellows compound. But within minutes the sky opened wider and the rain fell harder, steady and unrelenting, as if the heavens themselves could no longer hold back. Farida was still on her knees when it started. The courtyard, once bright and dry, now shimmered with thin streams of water running across the tiles. Her clothes clung slightly to her skin, dampened by the growing rain. But she didn't move. She didn't even seem to notice. Inside her, everything was already soaked. Mama Zainab had long since walked back into the house. Her anger satisfied, her authority reasserted. The others had followed quietly, their curiosity fading, now that the spectacle had ended. Only Aisha lingered for a moment near the doorway. She watched Farida, her expression conflicted, her fingers twisting nervously together. "Go inside," she whispered, barely loud enough to be heard over the rain. Farida didn't respond. Aisha hesitated. I didn't know it would be like this," she added, her voice trembling slightly. Still no response. Farida remained still, her gaze fixed somewhere far beyond the gate. After a few seconds, Aisha stepped back. Fear won again. She turned and disappeared into the house, leaving Farida alone with the rain. Minutes passed, or maybe longer. Time had become something distant, something unimportant. The only thing that pulled Farida back to the present was the sound of the gate. A faint metallic creak. Her head lifted slightly. Through the blur of rain, she saw movement outside. A shadow, then a figure. Baba Karim. He hadn't gone far. He stood just beyond the gate, partially sheltered by the overhang of a nearby structure. The rain fell heavily around him, soaking his already worn clothes, but he didn't seem to care. He was looking at her. Farida's breath caught. Slowly, painfully, she pushed herself up from the ground. Her knees ached, her body stiff, but she didn't stop. She moved toward the gate, each step uncertain but determined. When she reached it, she didn't open it. She simply stood there, separated from him by iron bars and distance that felt far greater than it should. "I'm sorry," she said softly, her voice barely carrying through the rain. Baba Karim shook his head gently. "You have nothing to apologize for," he replied. Farida's eyes filled again. "They hurt you," she whispered. "They revealed themselves," he corrected quietly. Farida frowned slightly, not fully understanding. "You showed kindness," he continued. "They showed fear." Farida looked down, her hands gripping the cold metal of the gate. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," she said. "Trouble does not come from kindness," Baba Karim said. "It comes from those who do not understand it." The rain fell harder between them. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Farida looked up again. "Where will you go?" she asked. Baba Karim's expression remained calm. "Where I am meant to be," he answered. Farida's heart tightened. "That's not an answer," she said quietly. He gave a faint smile. "Sometimes it is the only one we have." Farida hesitated. She wanted to do more, to give more, but she had nothing left to offer. Even the small things she once had access to were now out of reach. "I wish," she began, then stopped. Baba Karim watched her patiently. "I wish I could help you more," she finished. He studied her for a moment, then shook his head. "You already have," he said. Farida opened her mouth to respond, but no words came, because deep down, she knew it wasn't enough. Not for someone who had given her so much without asking for anything in return. "I will be fine," Baba Karim added as if sensing her thoughts. Farida nodded slowly, though the doubt in her eyes remained. A distant sound interrupted the moment. The low hum of an engine. Both of them turned slightly. Down the road, barely visible through the curtain of rain, a sleek black car sat motionless. Farida hadn't noticed it before, but now that she did something about it, felt deliberate, watching, waiting. Baba Karim's gaze lingered on the car for just a second longer than necessary. Then he looked back at Farida. "It is time," he said softly. Farida felt a sudden urgency rise in her chest. "Will I see you again?" she asked. Baba Karim paused. The rain continued to fall between them, blurring the space, softening the edges of everything around. Then he nodded. "Yes," he said. Farida exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Take care of yourself," she said. "And you," he replied. He stepped back slowly, then turned and began to walk away. Farida stood there watching until his figure faded into the rain. The black car's engine grew louder. Its headlights flickered on, and as Baba Karim reached the edge of the road, the car moved forward. The door opened. A man in a dark suit stepped out quickly, holding an umbrella. He approached Baba Karim with a level of urgency that did not match the way others had treated him. Farida's eyes narrowed slightly. Something wasn't right. The man spoke to Baba Karim, his posture respectful, almost deferential. Then carefully he guided him toward the car. Farida's breath slowed. Her fingers tightened against the gate. This was not how people treated a beggar. This was not normal. Baba Karim paused before entering the car. For just a moment he turned his head, back toward the compound, back toward Farida. Even from a distance she could feel it. That look, steady, intentional, as if he was seeing more than just her standing there in the rain. Then he stepped inside. The door closed. The car pulled away smoothly, disappearing into the wet streets of Lagos. Farida stood still long after it was gone. The rain continued to fall. But now something inside her had shifted. Not fear, not regret, something else, something she couldn't quite name yet. Behind her, the door to the house opened again. "Farida." The voice snapped her back. She turned. Mama Zainab stood there, her expression sharp with irritation. "Get inside," she ordered. "You've embarrassed this family enough for one day." Farida wiped her face quickly, though it was impossible to tell where the rain ended, and her tears began. "Yes, Mama," she said softly. She stepped away from the gate, back into the house, back into the silence. But this time something was different, because for the first time since everything had happened, Farida didn't feel completely powerless. She didn't understand why. She didn't know what was coming. But deep inside, a quiet voice whispered something she had never allowed herself to believe before. Maybe, just maybe, what she had done would matter. More than anyone in that house could imagine. That night, Farida was not allowed to eat. It wasn't announced loudly, nor was it written anywhere. In the Bellows household, punishment often came in quiet forms, denied privileges, withheld comfort, invisible lines drawn without explanation. But Farida understood. When she entered the dining room that evening, the table was already set. Plates arranged neatly, glasses shining under the soft chandelier. light the rich aroma of stew and spices filling the air. Mama Zainab sat at the head of the table. Yusuf was beside her. Two guests' business associates occupied the other seats, their laughter polite, controlled their conversation flowing easily. Farida paused at the doorway. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to hope. Maybe, just maybe, things would return to normal. "Stand there," Mama Zainab said without looking at her. The words were quiet, but firm. Farida's heart sank. "Yes, Mama," she replied softly. She remained by the doorway, her hands clasped in front of her, her posture straight, despite the exhaustion that had begun to settle deep into her bones. The meal began. Conversations continued. Laughter rose and fell, and Farida stood, unseen, unacknowledged, as if she were not part of the room at all. At one point, one of the guests, a well-dressed man with a smooth voice, glanced briefly in her direction. "Your daughter-in-law?" he asked casually. Mama Zainab's lips curved slightly. "She is still learning," she replied. The words sounded harmless, but Farida felt their weight. Still learning, still not enough, still not worthy. Yusuf didn't speak. He continued, eating, his gaze fixed on his plate. Farida watched him for a moment, longer than she should have. Hoping, waiting. But nothing came. So she lowered her eyes again. The rest of the evening passed slowly, each minute stretching into something heavier than the last. By the time the guests left, Farida's legs ached from standing. Her stomach was tight with hunger, but she didn't dare move toward the table. She didn't need to be told. When Mama Zainab finally rose from her seat, she paused briefly as she passed Farida. Next time, she said quietly, "Remember your place." Farida nodded. "Yes, Mama." Then the room emptied, and the silence returned. Farida stood there for a moment, longer staring at the untouched plates, the remnants of a meal she had prepared, but was never allowed to share. Then slowly, she turned away. Back to the kitchen. Back to her space. She moved quietly, cleaning what was left behind her hands, steady despite the emptiness growing inside her. Hunger was not new to her. She had known it before. But this felt different. This wasn't about survival. This was about control. Later that night, Farida sat alone in her small room at the far end of the house. The space was simple, barely furnished, with a narrow bed, a small wooden table, and a single window that overlooked the back of the compound. Rain still tapped softly against the glass. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands resting in her lap, her thoughts drifting. Her cheeks still burned faintly where Mama Zainab had struck her. Her knees ached. Her body was tired, but it was her heart that felt the heaviest. She leaned back, slowly resting against the wall. For the first time that day, she allowed herself to close her eyes. And in the quiet darkness behind them, memories surfaced. Baba Karim's face, his calm voice. "You have nothing to apologize for. You showed kindness. They showed fear." Farida exhaled slowly. Those words stayed with her. They didn't erase the pain. They didn't change what had happened. But they settled somewhere deep inside her, steady and unwavering. A knock at the door broke the silence. Soft, hesitant. Farida opened her eyes. "Who is it?" she asked gently. "It's me, Aisha." Farida sat up slightly. "Come in." The door creaked open, and Aisha stepped inside, her movements cautious, her eyes uncertain. She held something in her hands. A small plate. Farida's gaze shifted to it. "Food." I brought this for you," Aisha said quietly, setting the plate down on the table. Farida stared at it for a moment, surprised. "You shouldn't have," she said softly. Aisha shook her head. "I should have done more," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. Farida looked up at her. There was guilt in Aisha's eyes, heavy, unmistakable. "I didn't know Mama would react like that," Aisha continued. "I thought maybe she would just warn you." Farida didn't respond immediately. She studied Aisha's face, the way her fingers twisted together nervously, the way she avoided direct eye contact. "I told her," Aisha admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "About the man. About the food." The words hung in the air. Farida felt them settle. But strangely, they didn't break her. Not the way they might have before. Instead, she nodded slowly. "I know," she said. Aisha's head snapped up, surprised. You know," Farida gave a small, tired smile. It wasn't hard to guess. Aisha swallowed. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I was scared. I didn't want to lose my job. I didn't think it would go that far." Farida looked down at her hands. Fear. She understood that, more than most. "It's all right," she said after a moment. Aisha frowned slightly. "It's not all right," she insisted. "What they did to you. It's not right." Farida's smile softened. "No," she agreed quietly. "It's not." Aisha hesitated. "Why do you still help people like him?" she asked. "After everything, after how they treat you." Farida leaned back slightly, her gaze drifting toward the window. For a moment she didn't answer. Then she spoke. "Because I know what it feels like to be him." Aisha's brows furrowed. "To be invisible," Farida continued. "To sit there and watch people pass by like you don't exist. To hope, just once, that someone will stop." Her voice was calm, steady, but there was something deep within it. Something lived. "Someone stopped for me," once she added. "And it changed everything." Aisha listened silently. And now Farida said, looking back at her, "If I can be that person for someone else, even just once, then it matters." The room fell, quiet. Aisha lowered her gaze. "I wish I had your courage," she said softly. Farida shook her head. "It's not courage," she replied. "It's just choosing not to forget." Aisha nodded slowly. Then she stepped back toward the door. "You should eat," she said gently, "before someone notices." Farida smiled faintly. "I will." Aisha hesitated for a moment longer. Then she left. The door closed softly behind her. Farida looked at the plate again. Simple food, nothing special. But in that moment it felt like more. A small act of kindness, given quietly, without expectation. She reached for it slowly, and as she took the first bite, something shifted again. Not outside, not in the house, but within her. Because even in a place where she was constantly made to feel small, Farida realized something important. She still had something they couldn't take from her. Her heart. And no matter what they did, she wasn't going to let it change. The black car did not drive Farida out of its thoughts. Inside it, as the rain softened into a quiet drizzle, the man once known on the street as Baba Karim sat upright. Not like a beggar, not like a man discarded by the world, but like someone who had simply stepped out of one reality and back into another. The door shut with a soft, controlled sound. "Drive the man in the front seat," said. "Yes, sir," the driver responded immediately. The car moved smoothly through the wet Lagos streets, its tires barely making a sound against the asphalt. The city lights reflected on the glass, stretching into long lines of gold and white as they passed. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the man seated beside him, dressed in a dark, tailored suit, posture straight, expression alert, turned slightly. "Al-Haji, are you all right?" he asked. The old man, no longer simply Baba Karim, let out a slow breath. "I am fine, Musa," he replied calmly. His voice had changed. It was still gentle, still measured, but now it carried authority, the kind that did not need to raise itself to be heard. Musa nodded. "We were worried when you did not return at the expected time," he said. "Security has been tracking your movements, but I told you not to interfere." Al-Haji Sadiq Rahman interrupted softly. Musa lowered his gaze slightly. "Yes, sir." Silence settled again, but it was not uncomfortable. It was reflective. Al-Haji Sadiq leaned back slightly, his eyes drifting toward the window as the city passed by. But he wasn't seeing the streets. He was seeing her, Farida, the way she had knelt without hesitation, the way her voice had carried no pride, no expectation, the way she had defended him, even when it cost her everything. He had seen many things in his life: wealth, power, deception. He had watched people perform kindness when it was convenient, when it was visible, when it could be rewarded. But what he saw today, that was different. "That girl," he said quietly. Musa looked up. "Yes, sir." "What did you see?" Musa hesitated for a moment. "I saw someone who acted without thinking of consequences," he said carefully. "Someone who does not understand the world she is in." Al-Haji Sadiq shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "I saw someone who understands it, and chooses to be different anyway." Musa remained silent. Al-Haji Sadiq's gaze sharpened slightly. "Find out everything about her," he said. "Yes, sir. Her background, her family, how she came into that house." Musa nodded, already making mental notes. "And the family?" he asked. Al-Haji Sadiq's expression darkened slightly. "They showed me who they are," he replied. "Now I want to see how far that truth goes." The car slowed as it approached a large gated compound. Unlike the Bellows house, this one was not just a home, it was a statement. Tall gates opened automatically. Security personnel stood at attention. The car entered smoothly, moving along a long driveway lined with trimmed hedges and soft lighting. When it stopped, a group of staff were already waiting. Musa stepped out first, opening the door. Al-Haji Sadiq emerged slowly. Gone were the hunched shoulders. Gone was the fragile movement. He stood tall, composed, commanding. A man who belonged exactly where he was. "Welcome back, sir," one of the staff members said respectfully. Al-Haji Sadiq nodded slightly. "Prepare the study," he said, "and bring me the reports from last week." "Yes, sir." He walked inside without another word. But even as he moved through the grand halls of his home, his thoughts remained elsewhere. With her. Back at the Bellows house, Farida woke early the next morning. The sky was still pale, the first light just beginning to push through the edges of the horizon. She sat up slowly, her body still sore, her mind heavy with everything that had happened. For a moment she considered staying in bed, just for a little longer, but habit pulled her forward. Responsibility. She dressed quietly and stepped out into the hallway. The house was still, peaceful, but she knew it wouldn't last. By the time breakfast preparations began, Mama Zainab would be awake. And with her, the tension. Farida moved through the kitchen with quiet efficiency, preparing tea, arranging plates, keeping everything exactly as it should be. Aisha entered shortly after, her eyes flickering briefly toward Farida. "Good morning," she said softly. "Good morning," Farida replied. There was a moment of silence. Then Aisha leaned slightly closer. "Did you sleep?" she asked. Farida gave a small nod. "A little." Aisha hesitated. "I heard Mama speaking last night," she said carefully. Farida's hands paused slightly. "What did she say?" she asked. Aisha lowered her voice. "She's still angry," she said. "She told Yusuf that, if this continues, something will have to change." Farida's chest tightened slightly. She didn't need an explanation. She knew what that meant. "Thank you," she said quietly. Aisha nodded, then stepped back. The day moved forward as expected. Breakfast was served. Mama Zainab remained distant. Yusuf said little. Nothing had changed, and yet everything felt different. Because now Farida carried something she hadn't before. Not hope, not exactly, but something close to it. A quiet sense that the world was not as fixed as it seemed. That somewhere beyond the walls of this house, something had shifted. She didn't know why, she didn't know how, but she felt it. Later that afternoon, as she stood near the back of the house, her eyes drifted toward the gate. The same gate, the same place. But he wasn't there. Of course he wasn't. Still, a small part of her had hoped. She exhaled slowly, turning away. But just as she stepped back inside, a car passed slowly along the road outside. Black, sleek, familiar. Farida paused. Her heart skipped slightly. For a brief moment, she felt it again. That strange feeling that something was watching, not in a way that felt threatening, but aware. She shook her head slightly. It was nothing, just her imagination. She turned and walked back into the house, unaware that far from her in a quiet study filled with documents and screens, her name was already being written down. Farida, age 26, status married into Bellows family, background orphan, raised by community support, behavioral notes consistently compassionate, acts without expectation of reward. Al-Haji Sadiq Rahman closed the file slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Bring her to me," he said quietly. Musa looked up. "Now, sir." Al-Haji Sadiq shook his head. "No." He leaned back slightly. "Not yet, because men like him did not move without purpose. And what he had seen in Farida was worth more than a simple gesture. It was worth time, observation, and truth. The kind of truth that would soon begin to unravel everything Farida thought she understood about her life, and everything the Bellows family believed they controlled. The first sign was small, so small that no one in the Bellows household took it seriously at first. It came in the form of a phone call. Yusuf was in his study that morning when his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, expecting a routine update from one of their business partners. Instead, the name that appeared made him sit up slightly straighter. It was Mr. Okoye, a man who did not call without reason. "Good morning," Sir Yusuf answered quickly. There was no greeting on the other end. "Yusuf," the voice said, clipped and unusually cold. "We need to pause the shipment." Yusuf frowned. "Pause." "Why, a directive came from above," Mr. Okoye replied. "New conditions. We can't proceed." Yusuf's grip on the phone tightened. "What conditions? We've already signed the agreement." There was a brief silence. "Then it's out of my hands." The call ended. Yusuf stared at the phone for a moment, confusion settling into unease. This wasn't normal. Deals didn't just stop like that. Not without warning, not without explanation. He stood up immediately, already dialing another number. One call turned into two, two into five, and with each conversation the pattern became clearer. Delays, cancellations, uncertainty. Something was shifting, something bigger than a single deal. By midday the tension had spread through the house. Mama Zainab noticed it first. Not through words, but through absence. Yusuf hadn't come down for lunch. The usual calls from associates hadn't come. Even the staff moved differently, quieter, as if they could feel the change in the air. She found Yusuf in his study, his face tight, his posture rigid. "What is happening?" she asked without preamble. Yusuf exhaled slowly. "There are issues with the contracts," he said. "What kind of issues?" "Cancellations, delays, no clear reasons." Mama Zainab frowned. "That makes no sense." "I know." She stepped closer, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Who is behind it?" Yusuf shook his head. "I don't know yet." That answer did not satisfy her. It couldn't, because in her world things did not happen without reason. Power always had a source, and if something was strong enough to disrupt their business, then it was strong enough to threaten everything. "This is not coincidence," she said firmly. Yusuf didn't argue, because deep down he knew she was right. In the kitchen, Farida worked quietly, unaware of the full extent of what was happening, but not unaware of the tension. She could feel it, in the way Aisha moved more quickly than usual, in the way voices carried sharper edges from the main house, in the way Yusuf's footsteps echoed heavier through the hallway. Something was wrong, but no one told her anything. They never did. Still she noticed, and she listened. That afternoon, as she carried a tray of tea toward the sitting room, she heard Mama Zainab's voice rising. "This is exactly what I warned you about." Farida slowed slightly. "I told you from the beginning," Mama Zainab continued. "Bringing that girl into this house would bring nothing but problems." Farida's chest tightened. Yusuf's voice followed lower, but strained. "This has nothing to do with her mama." "Oh, really?" Mama Zainab snapped. "Everything was fine before she came." Farida stood just outside the doorway now, the tray, trembling slightly in her hands. She shouldn't listen. She knew that, but she couldn't move. "You think it's a coincidence," Mama Zainab pressed. "The moment she starts bringing strangers into our lives, beggars no less, everything begins to fall apart." Yusuf didn't respond immediately, and that silence, it said more than words ever could. Farida closed her eyes briefly. There it was, the blame. It always found its way back to her. "She is not responsible for this," Yusuf said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. Mama Zainab let out a sharp laugh. "You are blind," she said, "or worse. You are weak." Farida stepped back quietly, her heart heavy. She didn't wait to be called. She returned the tray to the kitchen, without entering the room, because she already knew. In their eyes, she was no longer just an outsider. She was a problem. By evening, the situation had worsened. Another contract collapsed. A shipment was delayed indefinitely, and a major investor requested a sudden review of their partnership. Yusuf sat in the living room. His tie loosened his posture, tense. Mama Zainab stood nearby. Her arms crossed, her expression hard. "This is not random," she said again. "Someone is doing this." Yusuf rubbed his temples. "I'm trying to find out who," he replied. "Well, try faster," she snapped, "before we lose everything." The word hung in the air. Everything. For the first time, it didn't feel like an exaggeration. Later that night, Yusuf found himself standing outside Farida's room. He hadn't planned to come. He hadn't even realized he was walking in this direction. But there he was. His hand hovered near the door. He hesitated, then knocked. Inside, Farida looked up, surprised. "Come in," she said softly. Yusuf entered slowly, his expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, "Did you do anything unusual recently?" he asked. Farida frowned slightly. "Unusual?" Yusuf shifted. Something that might have caused attention. Farida's mind flickered briefly to Baba Karim. Her chest tightened. "I don't think so," she said carefully. Yusuf studied her face, searching. For what? Even he didn't seem to know. "You can tell me," he said. Farida held his gaze. "I've only been doing what I always do," she replied. There was truth in that, but it wasn't the whole truth, and somehow Yusuf felt it. Still, he said nothing, because part of him didn't want to know, because knowing might mean facing something he wasn't ready to confront. He nodded slowly. "All right." He turned to leave, but before he reached the door, Farida spoke. "Yusuf." He paused, but didn't turn. "Do you believe them?" she asked quietly. There was a long silence. Then I don't know what to believe right now, he said. And with that he walked out. Farida sat still, her hands resting in her lap. The answer hurt. Not because it was harsh, but because it was uncertain. Because uncertainty meant doubt, and doubt was sometimes worse than rejection. Far from the Bellows house in a quiet office filled with soft light and quiet power, Al-Haji Sadiq Rahman reviewed the latest reports. Musa stood nearby, tablet in hand. The first wave has taken effect, he said. Contracts paused. Partnerships under review. Pressure is building. Al-Haji Sadiq nodded slightly. And the family confused? Musa replied. Unaware of the source, Al-Haji Sadiq's gaze hardened. Good. He set the file down slowly. This is only the beginning. Musa hesitated. And the woman, he asked. Al-Haji Sadiq's expression softened slightly. She is still standing, he said. Musa nodded. Do we proceed to the next phase? Al-Haji Sadiq leaned back, his fingers steepled thoughtfully. Yes, he said, but carefully, because this was no longer just about business. It was about truth, about character, about revealing what lay beneath the surface when everything else began to fall away. And in that unfolding storm, Farida stood at the center, unaware that the quiet act of kindness she had offered was now setting into motion something far greater than she could imagine. Something that would soon force everyone around her to face who they truly were. The next test did not come with a warning. It never did. Farida was in the small backyard behind the Bellows house that afternoon, hanging washed clothes on a thin line stretched between two poles. The sun had returned after days of rain, its heat pressing gently against her skin as she worked in silence. Moments like this were rare. Quiet, unobserved. For a short time she could breathe. Aisha was inside, busy with the kitchen. Mama Zainab had left earlier for a meeting, and Yusuf had not returned from the office. The house felt still. Farida reached for the last piece of cloth, lifting it carefully. Then she heard it, a faint sound near the back gate. Not the main gate, the smaller one. She paused, listened. There it was again. A soft knock, almost hesitant. Farida hesitated. She wasn't supposed to open that gate. Not without permission, especially not after what had happened. Her fingers tightened slightly around the cloth. She should ignore it. She knew that. But something inside her, the same quiet pull she had felt before, refused to let her walk away. Slowly, she set the cloth down and moved toward the gate. Each step carried a weight of uncertainty. When she reached it, she didn't open it immediately. "Who is there?" she asked. There was a pause. Then a weak voice responded. "Please, I need help." Farida's heart tightened instantly. She opened the gate just enough to see. A young woman stood there, barefoot. Her clothes were worn dusty, clinging loosely to her thin frame. Her face was drawn, her eyes tired, but there was something else in them. Desperation. I haven't eaten since yesterday," the woman said, her voice trembling slightly. "I was told maybe someone here could help." Farida swallowed. The memory of Mama Zainab's voice echoed sharply in her mind. "Next time, remember your place." Her hand remained on the gate. She could close it, walk away, pretend she never heard anything. That would be safer. That would be easier. But the woman's eyes, they reminded her too much of someone she used to be. Farida exhaled slowly. "Wait, here," she said, softly. The woman nodded quickly, relief flashing across her face. Farida closed the gate gently and turned back toward the house. Her heart was already beating faster. She knew the risk. She understood it fully now. This was no longer ignorance. This was a choice. Inside the kitchen, she moved quickly, quietly. There was food left from earlier rice, some stew, a piece of bread. Not much, but enough. She placed it into a small container, her hands steady despite the tension building in her chest. Every second felt heavier, like time itself was watching her. She stepped back outside. The woman was still there, waiting. Farida opened the gate slightly again and handed her the food. "Take this," she said gently. The woman's hands trembled as she received it. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." Farida gave a small nod. "Eat slowly," she said, "and try to find shelter before it gets dark." The woman nodded again, already stepping back. Farida closed the gate. For a moment she leaned against it, her breath shallow. She had done it again, despite everything, despite the consequences. And, strangely, she didn't feel afraid. She felt certain. Inside, Aisha appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide. "You did it again," she whispered urgently. Farida looked at her. "Yes." Aisha shook her head slightly, panic creeping into her voice. "Farida, if Mama finds out." "I know," Farida said quietly. Then why? Aisha pressed. "Why risk it again?" Farida didn't answer immediately. She simply looked toward the gate, then back at Aisha. "Because she needed it," she said. Aisha stared at her. For a moment she didn't speak. Then she sighed, rubbing her forehead. "You're going to get yourself into serious trouble," she muttered. Farida gave a faint smile. "Maybe," she said, but her voice carried no regret. What Farida didn't know was that she wasn't alone. Across the street, partially hidden behind a parked vehicle, a man stood watching. He was dressed simply, blending in with the surroundings. Unremarkable, invisible, exactly as he was meant to be. In his ear, a small device carried his voice. "She did it again," he said quietly. There was a pause. Then a response came through. "Describe it." The man adjusted his position slightly. "No hesitation," he said. "Same pattern." She checked, assessed, then helped. No sign of fear overriding her decision. Another pause. "Did she recognize you?" "No good." The line went silent, but the message had already been received. In his study, Alhaji Sadiq Rahman listened carefully. His expression remained calm, but his eyes, they sharpened slightly. "She didn't change," Musa said from across the room, lowering his device. Alhaji Sadiq nodded slowly. "Most people would," he said, "after what she went through." Musa stepped closer. "This confirms it," he said. "Her actions are consistent, not influenced by environment or consequence." Alhaji Sadiq leaned back slightly. "Exactly." He looked toward the window, his thoughts focused. "This is not kindness for show," he continued. "It is part of who she is." Musa hesitated. "And the family?" he asked. Alhaji Sadiq's expression hardened again. "They will face what they have built," he said. He reached for another file. "Prepare the next step." Musa nodded. "Yes, sir." Back at the Bellows house, the tension continued to build. By evening, Yusuf returned home later than usual. His face was drawn, his movements slower, heavier. Farida noticed immediately. "Are you all right?" she asked gently as he entered. Yusuf didn't respond at first. He loosened his tie, exhaling deeply. "No," he said finally. Farida stepped closer. "What happened?" Yusuf ran a hand through his hair. "Another deal collapsed," he said. No explanation, no warning. Farida's chest tightened. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Yusuf looked at her then. Really looked. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Not anger, not frustration, something else. Confusion. "You're always—" "Calm," he said suddenly. Farida blinked slightly. "I don't know what else to be," she replied. Yusuf studied her for a moment longer, then shook his head. "I wish I understood that," he muttered. He walked past her, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't look away because of his mother. He looked away because of himself. That night, Farida stood by the window in her room. The air was quiet again, still, but beneath it, something was moving. She could feel it now, not clearly, not fully, but enough to know that the world around her was shifting. She didn't know why, she didn't know how, but she knew one thing. Whatever was coming, it had already begun. And this time, she would not stop being who she was, no matter the cost. The fall, when it finally came, was not loud. It did not arrive with a crash or a sudden collapse. It came quietly, like something that had been weakening for a long time, finally giving way. 3 days after the second incident at the back gate, the Bellows household received a letter. It was delivered in the morning, sealed, official, the kind of envelope that carried weight before it was even opened. Aisha was the one who brought it in her hands, slightly unsteady as she placed it on the table, in front of Mama Zainab. "It came from the bank," she said softly. Mama Zainab frowned. "Leave it," she said. But she did not leave it unopened for long. Something about it unsettled her. She picked it up, broke the seal, and read. At first her expression didn't change. Then slowly, it did. Her lips tightened, her eyes narrowed, her posture stiffened. "What is it?" Yusuf asked from across the room. Mama Zainab didn't answer immediately. She read the letter again, as if hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something less threatening, but they didn't. Finally, she lowered the paper. "The bank is reviewing our assets," she said. Yusuf frowned. "Reviewing? Why, they are concerned about the recent disruptions in our business operations," she replied. "If things are not stabilized, they may take further action." Yusuf stood up immediately. What kind of action? Mama Zainab met his eyes. "Asset recovery." The words hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Farida, standing quietly near the doorway, felt her chest tighten. She didn't fully understand the details, but she understood the tone. This was serious. Very serious. "This doesn't make sense," Yusuf said, his voice rising slightly. "We've never had issues like this before." "And yet here we are," Mama Zainab replied sharply. Yusuf began pacing. "There has to be someone behind this," he said. "Someone powerful enough to interfere at this level." Mama Zainab's gaze shifted slightly, and for just a moment, it landed on Farida. The silence that followed was heavy, unspoken, but clear. Farida felt it immediately. The blame. Again. "It started after she came," Mama Zainab said quietly. Yusuf stopped pacing. "Mama, I ignored it at first," she continued. "But now we are losing everything. This has nothing to do with her," Yusuf insisted, though his voice carried less certainty than before. Mama Zainab turned fully toward Farida now. "You bring strangers into this house," she said coldly. "You bring shame. And now you bring ruin." Farida shook her head quickly. "No, Mama." Enough," Mama Zainab snapped. The room fell silent. Farida's hands trembled slightly at her sides. She wanted to explain, to defend herself, but the words felt useless, because this was no longer about truth. This was about fear. And fear always needed something to blame. Mama Zainab took a slow step forward. "I will not allow everything I have built to be destroyed by someone who does not even understand the value of it," she said. Farida's breath caught. "What are you saying?" Yusuf asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. Mama Zainab didn't look at him. Her eyes remained fixed on Farida. "She cannot stay here," she said. The words landed like a final judgment. Farida felt the ground shift beneath her. Yusuf hesitated. "Mama, this is not a discussion," Mama Zainab cut in. It is a decision. Silence, heavy, unforgiving. Farida looked at Yusuf, waiting, hoping, just once. But he didn't meet her eyes. He didn't speak, and in that silence, everything was decided. Farida swallowed slowly. Her voice when it came was soft. "If that is what you want," she said. Mama Zainab didn't respond. Farida nodded once, then turned. She walked out of the room, without another word. Not because she had nothing to say, but because she finally understood something she had been trying not to accept. There was no place for her there. Packing did not take long. Farida had never brought much into the Bellows house, and now she would take even less out. A small bag, a few clothes, nothing more. She moved quietly, methodically, as if the simplicity of the task could somehow make the moment easier. It didn't. Aisha stood in the doorway watching. Tears filled her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Farida looked up. Her expression was calm, tired, but calm. "It's not your fault," she said gently. Aisha shook her head. "It is," she insisted. "If I hadn't told Farida stepped closer, and if you hadn't," she said softly, "something else would have happened." Aisha wiped her eyes. "This isn't right," she said. Farida gave a small smile. "No," she agreed. "It's not." She picked up her bag. For a moment she looked around the room. The walls, the bed, the space that had never truly been hers. Then she turned and walked out. No one came to stop her. No one came to say goodbye. The gate opened, and Farida stepped out, into the world she once knew. But now, with nothing. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the road. Farida walked slowly. Not because she didn't know where to go, but because she didn't. For the first time in a long time. She had no plan, no place, no certainty, just herself. And yet, she didn't feel broken. She felt empty, but not defeated. Because even now, as everything she had tried to hold on to slipped away, one thing remained. She had not changed. Far from her in a quiet office overlooking the city, Al-Haji Sadiq Rahman received the update. "She has been removed from the house," Musa said. Al-Haji Sadiq remained silent for a moment. Then, "Where is she now?" "Walking," Musa replied. "No destination yet." Al-Haji Sadiq stood slowly. "Prepare the car," he said. Musa blinked slightly. "Sir, it is time," Al-Haji Sadiq repeated. Because some moments could not be delayed. Some truths needed to be revealed, and some people deserved to be seen. Farida stepped forward into the fading light, unaware that everything was about to change. The road felt longer than Farida remembered. Not because it had changed, but because she had. Each step carried a quiet weight, not of regret, but of uncertainty. The sun had already begun to set, painting the Lagos sky in shades of orange and fading gold. People moved around her, some rushing home, others lingering by roadside stalls. But to Farida, it all felt distant. Unconnected. She walked with no clear direction, no destination, only the rhythm of her own footsteps to guide her forward. Her small bag hung loosely from her shoulder, barely filled, yet somehow heavy. Inside it were the few things she owned: simple clothes, a scarf, a worn photograph she had kept since childhood. Nothing that could protect her from the night ahead. She paused briefly, near a roadside kiosk, watching as a woman handed food to her child. The boy smiled, his face lighting up with a joy so simple, so pure it made something inside Farida tighten. She looked away, not out of bitterness, but because it reminded her of something she no longer had. Or perhaps, something she had never truly been allowed to keep. She exhaled slowly and continued walking. The sky darkened further. The streets grew quieter, and the reality of her situation settled more deeply into her chest. Where would she sleep? What would she do tomorrow? The questions came one after another, pressing against her thoughts, but she pushed them aside. Because right now she didn't have answers, and thinking about them wouldn't create any. She just needed to keep moving. Eventually she found herself near a quieter part of the road where fewer people passed and the noise of the city softened into something more distant. A small bench sat beneath a tree. Old, worn, but empty. Farida hesitated, then walked toward it. She sat down slowly, placing her bag beside her, her body finally allowing itself to rest. For a moment she closed her eyes. The world seemed to pause with her. The air was cooler now, gentler, and in that quiet, something inside her shifted again. Not hope, not yet, but something close to it. A quiet resilience, the kind that didn't need words, just presence. Farida. The voice came softly, familiar. Her eyes opened instantly, her heart skipped. She turned, and there he was. Baba Karim, standing just a few steps away. For a moment she simply stared, as if her mind needed time to catch up with what her eyes were seeing. "You're here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He smiled faintly. "I told you we would meet again." Farida stood quickly, her exhaustion forgotten for a moment. "I didn't think... I wasn't sure." Her words stumbled over themselves. Baba Karim stepped closer. "You look tired," he said gently. Farida let out a small breath. "I am," she admitted. He studied her for a moment. Then his gaze softened further. "They sent you away," he said. It wasn't a question. Farida nodded slowly. Yes. There was no anger in her voice, no bitterness, just truth. Baba Karim's expression grew more serious. "And still," he said quietly, "you do not regret what you did." Farida shook her head. "No." The answer came without hesitation, because it was the only answer she had. Baba Karim watched her closely, as if measuring something deeper than her words. Then he nodded. "Good," he said. Farida frowned slightly. "Good," she repeated. Before he could respond, the sound of a car approaching interrupted them. Farida turned instinctively. Her breath caught. A black car, the same one. It pulled up smoothly beside the road, its presence quiet but unmistakable. Farida's heart began to beat faster. Something about this moment felt significant, unavoidable. The car door opened. A man stepped out, well-dressed, composed, holding himself with a kind of quiet authority that did not need to be announced. He walked toward them, stopped, and then he did something that made Farida freeze. He bowed his head slightly. "Toward Baba Karim, sir," he said respectfully. Farida's eyes widened. Her gaze shifted slowly, from the man to Baba Karim. Something didn't make sense. This wasn't how people treated a beggar. This wasn't how anyone had treated him before. "Is everything prepared?" Baba Karim asked calmly. The man nodded. "Yes, Al-Haji." The word hung in the air, heavy, clear. Farida felt her breath catch in her throat. "Al-Haji." She looked at Baba Karim again, really looked this time. And suddenly, everything felt different. The way he stood, the way he spoke, the calm in his presence. It had always been there. She just hadn't seen it. "You..." She began, her voice trembling slightly. "Who are you, Baba Karim?" No longer just Baba Karim turned fully toward her. And for the first time, there was no need to hide. "My name," he said slowly, "is Al-Haji Sadiq Rahman." The world seemed to still. Farida stared at him. The name meant something, even to her. It was known, respected, powerful. She took a step back. I don't understand," she said. Al-Haji Sadiq's gaze remained steady. "I believe you do," he replied gently. Farida shook her head slightly, her mind racing. All this time, You were a man in need, he finished. She looked at him, confusion and realization mixing in her eyes. You let them treat you like that, she said. I allowed them to reveal themselves, he corrected. Farida's chest tightened. And me? She asked quietly. Al-Haji Sadiq's expression softened. You showed me who you are, he said. Silence fell between them. But this time, it was not heavy. It was full of truth, full of understanding. Farida exhaled slowly. I didn't know, she said. I know, he replied, and it doesn't change anything, she added. Al-Haji Sadiq studied her carefully. Doesn't it? He asked. Farida shook her head. You were still hungry, she said. You still needed help. The simplicity of her answer lingered. Uncomplicated, unfiltered, real. And in that moment, something in Al-Haji Sadiq's eyes shifted. Approval, respect. Come, he said. Farida blinked. Come, she repeated. You cannot stay here, he continued. And I will not allow you to face the night alone. Farida hesitated. Her instincts told her to be cautious, but her heart, it recognized something else. Trust, not because of who he was, but because of what she had seen, who he had been, and who he had revealed himself to be. Slowly, she nodded. All right, she said. Al-Haji Sadiq turned slightly toward the car. The driver stepped forward, opening the door. Farida looked at it for a moment, then back at the road she had been walking. The uncertainty, the loneliness, and then she made her choice. She stepped forward and entered the car. As the door closed behind her, Farida didn't realize it yet. But the life she had just left behind was about to collide with something far greater than she could have ever imagined, and for the first time since everything began, she was no longer alone. The car moved smoothly through the quiet evening streets, its interior calm, insulated from the noise and uncertainty outside. Farida sat near the window, her hands resting in her lap, her thoughts still trying to catch up with everything that had just happened. Al-Haji Sadiq Rahman sat across from her. No longer the fragile man she had first met by the roadside, no longer the quiet figure dismissed by everyone else. Now there was no hiding who he was. His posture was upright, composed. His presence filled the space, not through force, but through certainty. Farida glanced at him again, still unsure how to reconcile the two versions of the same man. You've been quiet, he said gently. Farida blinked, then let out a small breath. I'm trying to understand, she admitted. That is a good place to start, he replied. She hesitated. Why, she asked finally. Why did you do all of that? Pretend? Live like that, Al-Haji? Sadiq leaned back slightly, his expression thoughtful. Because the world looks very different when you are no longer recognized, he said. When people believe you have nothing, they show you who they truly are. Farida absorbed his words slowly. And what did you see? She asked. Al-Haji Sadiq's gaze shifted briefly toward the window as if replaying something in his mind. I saw indifference, he said. I saw fear. I saw cruelty disguised as order. He paused, and then he added, I saw you. Farida lowered her gaze slightly. I didn't do anything special, she said. You did everything that matters, he replied. Silence settled between them again, but this time it felt different, lighter, more open. Farida leaned her head slightly against the seat, her body finally allowing itself to relax. For the first time in days, she felt safe. The car turned into a wide, gated entrance. Tall iron gates opened automatically as they approached, revealing a long driveway lined with soft lights and carefully trimmed greenery. Farida's eyes widened slightly. This place, it was nothing like the Bellows house. It was larger, more refined, but strangely, it didn't feel cold. It felt calm. The car came to a gentle stop. A man in a dark suit stepped forward, opening the door for her. Farida hesitated for a brief moment, then stepped out. Her feet touched the ground carefully, as if she wasn't entirely sure she belonged there. "You are welcome here," Al-Haji Sadiq said, stepping beside her. Farida looked around. Staff members moved quietly in the background, their expressions respectful but not intrusive. No one stared, no one judged, no one whispered. It was different. "Come," Al-Haji Sadiq said. He led her inside. The interior was elegant but not overwhelming. Warm lighting softened the space, and the quiet atmosphere made everything feel intentional. Farida followed him, her eyes taking in every detail, not with envy, but with curiosity. They entered a sitting room, and Al-Haji Sadiq gestured for her to sit. She did slowly. "You must be tired," he said. Farida nodded. "A little." He signaled to a staff member. "Prepare a room for her," he said. "And bring food." "Yes, sir." Farida watched the interaction carefully. The respect, the ease. It wasn't forced. It was natural. "Why are you helping me?" she asked suddenly. Al-Haji Sadiq turned back to her. "Because you helped me," he replied simply. Farida shook her head slightly. "That's not the same," she said. "I gave you food. You're giving me all of this." Al-Haji Sadiq studied her. "Kindness does not measure itself in equal parts," he said. "It gives what it can." Farida held his gaze. "And what if I can't give anything back?" she asked. "You already have," he said. The certainty in his voice left no room for argument. Farida looked away, her chest tightening slightly. She wasn't used to this, to being seen this way, to being valued. "Rest tonight," Al-Haji Sadiq said after a moment. "Tomorrow we will talk more." Farida nodded. "Thank you," she said softly. He inclined his head slightly, then turned and left the room. Later that night, Farida sat alone in the room that had been prepared for her. It was simple, clean, comfortable. More than anything she had ever had to herself. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands resting lightly against the soft fabric beneath her. It didn't feel real. Just days ago, she had been standing in the Bellows house, trying to prove her worth. Now, she was here. She lay back slowly, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to breathe. Fully. The next morning came quietly. Farida woke to soft light filtering through the curtains. For a moment, she didn't move. She simply lay there listening. No raised voices, no tension, no fear, just calm. She sat up slowly, her mind clearer than it had been in days. A gentle knock came at the door. "Come in," she said. A staff member entered carrying a tray. "Good morning," the woman said, kindly. "Al-Haji asked me to bring you breakfast." Farida smiled faintly. "Thank you." The woman set the tray down and left. Farida looked at the food. Simple, warm, given without condition. She ate slowly, thoughtfully, each bite grounding her further in the reality of where she was. After she finished, she stood and moved toward the window. The view stretched wide gardens, pathways, a sense of space she had never known. But even as she stood there, her thoughts drifted. Back to the Bellows house, to Yusuf, to everything that had happened. A knock came again. Stronger this time. Farida turned. "Come in." The door opened, and there he was, Yusuf, standing in the doorway, his expression different. Not angry, not distant. Something else. Something she hadn't seen before. Regret. Farida's breath caught. "What are you doing here?" she asked quietly. Yusuf stepped inside slowly. "I've been looking for you," he said. Farida remained still. "How did you find me?" Yusuf hesitated. Someone told me, he said. Someone who knew where you were. Farida didn't respond. She simply watched him. You left, he continued, his voice tightening slightly. You didn't say anything. Farida's eyes softened, but her voice remained steady. I wasn't given a choice. Yusuf looked down briefly. I know, he said. Silence, heavy, unresolved. I'm sorry, he added. The words lingered. Farida absorbed them, but they didn't erase anything. I should have stood up for you, Yusuf continued. I should have, yes, Farida said quietly. He stopped. Her voice wasn't harsh, but it was honest, and that honesty cut deeper than anger ever could. I didn't, he admitted. Farida nodded. I know. Another silence, this one heavier, more final. Yusuf looked at her again. Come back, he said suddenly. Farida's expression didn't change. Why, she asked. Yusuf hesitated. Because things are falling apart, he said. We need you. Farida felt something shift inside her. Not pain, clarity. You don't need me, she said softly. You need someone to blame. Yusuf flinched slightly. That's not true. Farida held his gaze. Then why now, she asked. He didn't answer, because he couldn't, and they both knew it. Farida took a slow breath. I forgive you, she said. Yusuf's eyes widened slightly. But I'm not coming back. The words settled between them. Firm, unshakable. For the first time. Farida was no longer asking to be accepted. She was choosing herself, and that changed everything. Yusuf stood frozen in the center of the room, Farida's words still echoing in his mind. I forgive you, but I'm not coming back. He had expected resistance, maybe even anger, but not this, not calm, not certainty. It unsettled him in a way he hadn't prepared for. Farida, he began, his voice lower now, almost uncertain. You don't understand how serious things have become. Farida looked at him steadily. No, she said softly. I think I finally do. There was no bitterness in her tone, just clarity. And that clarity made it harder for Yusuf to argue. Everything is collapsing, he said, running a hand through his hair. The contracts, the accounts, even the bank is threatening to take action. Farida listened quietly. For the first time, she saw it clearly. Not just the situation, but him, the pressure, the fear, the weight he had been carrying, and yet, it didn't change what had already been done. I'm sorry, he repeated. Farida nodded slightly. I know you are, she said. Yusuf took a step closer. Then come back, he said. We can fix this. Farida's eyes softened, but only for a moment. Yusuf, she said gently, you didn't lose me when I walked out of that gate. He frowned. You lost me when you chose silence. The words landed quietly, but they carried more weight than anything she had said before. Yusuf didn't respond, because deep down, he knew it was true. Before he could speak again, a voice came from the doorway. That will be enough. Both of them turned. Alhaji Sadiq Rahman stood there, composed, unmoved. His presence filled the space instantly, shifting the atmosphere in a way that needed no explanation. Yusuf straightened slightly, instinctively aware that he was now standing in front of someone far beyond his reach. Sir, he said, his voice uncertain. Alhaji Sadiq stepped forward slowly, his gaze fixed on Yusuf. You came to take her back, he said. It wasn't a question. Yusuf hesitated. Yes, he admitted. Alhaji Sadiq nodded once. And yet he continued. You did not come when she was humiliated. Yusuf's jaw tightened. I didn't know it would go that far. You knew enough, Alhaji Sadiq interrupted calmly. Silence fell, heavy, unavoidable. Farida watched quietly, her heart steady. She didn't feel the need to speak. Not anymore. Al-Haji Sadiq turned slightly, his attention shifting between them. "Do you understand why you are here today?" he asked Yusuf. Yusuf frowned. "I came because you are losing everything," Al-Haji Sadiq said. The truth landed cleanly, without emotion, without accusation, and yet it cut deeper than anything else. Yusuf swallowed. "That's not the only reason," he said. Al-Haji Sadiq studied him for a moment. "Perhaps not," he said. "But it is the reason that brought you to this door." Yusuf didn't deny it. Because he couldn't. Al-Haji Sadiq took another step forward. "Let me tell you something," he said quietly. "Power reveals character." Yusuf remained still, and when you had power, Al-Haji Sadiq continued, you chose silence. Farida felt a small shift inside her. Not satisfaction, not revenge, just truth being spoken. "And now," Al-Haji Sadiq added, "you are asking for something you did not protect." Yusuf looked at Farida, then back at Al-Haji Sadiq. "What do you want from me?" he asked. Al-Haji Sadiq's expression didn't change. "Nothing," he said. The answer surprised him. "But you will face the consequences of your choices." Yusuf's chest tightened. What consequences? Al-Haji Sadiq didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached into his pocket and handed Yusuf a document. Yusuf took it, his hands slightly unsteady. He opened it and read. His eyes widened. This isn't possible," he said. Al-Haji Sadiq's voice remained calm. "It already is." Yusuf looked up. "You're behind this?" he asked. There was no anger in his voice, just realization. Al-Haji Sadiq held his gaze. "I am responsible for what is happening to your business," he said. Farida's breath caught slightly. Even she hadn't known. Yusuf stared at him, stunned. Why, he asked. Al-Haji Sadiq's gaze shifted briefly toward Farida, then back to Yusuf. "Because I saw how you treat those who have nothing," he said. Yusuf's grip tightened on the paper. "This is business," he said weakly. "It has nothing to do with—" "It has everything to do with it," Al-Haji Sadiq interrupted. The room fell silent again. "You built your success on power," he continued. "But you forgot something important." Yusuf didn't speak. "Power without humanity is weakness," Al-Haji Sadiq said. The words settled heavily. Yusuf looked down at the document again. Everything he had worked for, slipping away, not by chance, not by bad luck, but by design. "Is there anything I can do?" he asked quietly. Al-Haji Sadiq watched him for a long moment. "Then yes," he said. Yusuf looked up quickly. "Anything," he added. Al-Haji Sadiq's expression remained unreadable. "Change," he said. Yusuf frowned slightly. "What? Not for business," Al-Haji Sadiq continued. "Not for survival." He paused. "But because you finally understand what you did." Yusuf looked at Farida again. "And this time," he didn't look away. "I do," he said. Farida held his gaze. She saw it now. Not just regret, but something deeper. Awareness. But awareness came too late. She stepped forward slightly. "You can change," she said gently. Yusuf's eyes softened. "Then come back," he said again, quieter this time. Farida shook her head. "No," she said. The answer was final. "But I hope you do change," she added, "because that was the only thing that mattered now." Yusuf nodded slowly. He didn't argue, he didn't push, because for the first time, he understood that some things could not be undone. He folded the document carefully, then looked at Al-Haji Sadiq. "I accept it," he said. Al-Haji Sadiq inclined his head slightly. "Good." Yusuf turned back to Farida one last time. "I'm sorry," he said again. Farida gave a small nod. "I know. And this time, That was enough. Yusuf turned and walked out. The door closed behind him. The room fell quiet, but it was no longer heavy. It was clear. Al-Haji Sadiq looked at Farida. "You handled that well," he said. Farida exhaled slowly. "I just told the truth," she replied. He nodded, and sometimes he said that is the hardest thing to do. Farida looked down briefly, then back up. "What happens now?" she asked. Al-Haji Sadiq's expression softened slightly. "Now," he said, "you decide who you want to become." Farida stood still, for the first time in her life. The future was hers. Not controlled, not dictated, not taken, but chosen, and that was the greatest gift of all. The morning arrived differently. For the first time in years, Farida woke up without the weight of expectation pressing down on her chest. There were no footsteps in the hallway to make her anxious, no voice calling her name with sharp authority, no silent tension waiting for her in the next room. Just quiet and space. She sat up slowly, letting the moment settle around her. Sunlight filtered softly through the curtains, warming the room in a way that felt almost unfamiliar. Freedom, she realized, was not loud. It was gentle. She stood and moved toward the window, looking out over the wide compound. Staff members moved calmly in the distance, the day unfolding without urgency or fear. For a brief moment, she simply watched. Then she took a breath and turned back. A soft knock came at the door. "Come in," she said. The door opened, and Amina, one of the household staff, stepped in with a polite smile. "Good morning," she said. "Al-Haji asked if you would join him for breakfast." Farida nodded. "I will." She dressed simply, choosing comfort over appearance. There was no one here to impress. No one here, measuring her worth based on how she spoke, how she walked, or where she came from. And that alone changed everything. When she entered the dining area, Al-Haji Sadiq Rahman was already seated reading a document. He looked up as she approached. "Good morning, Farida," he said. "Good morning," she replied, taking a seat across from him. For a moment they ate in silence, not the heavy silence she had known before, but something calmer, respectful. "How did you sleep?" he asked. "Well," she said. "Better than I expected." He nodded. "That is good." Farida hesitated slightly, then spoke. "I've been thinking," she said. Al-Haji Sadiq set his cup down. "About what he asked. About what comes next," she replied. He leaned back slightly. "And what have you decided?" Farida took a breath. "I don't want to just stay here," she said. "I want to do something." Al-Haji Sadiq's eyes sharpened slightly, not in disapproval, but in interest. "What kind of something?" he asked. Farida looked down briefly, gathering her thoughts. "I know what it feels like to have nothing," she said. "To depend on someone else's kindness just to get through the day." She looked back up. "And I know how much that kindness matters." Al-Haji Sadiq nodded slowly. "So you want to give it?" he said. Farida smiled faintly. "Yes." He studied her for a moment. "You understand that helping people is not always simple," he said. "It requires more than intention." "I know," she replied, "but I'm willing to learn." The certainty in her voice was clear, steady, real. Al-Haji Sadiq allowed a small smile to form. "Good," he said. "Then we will start there." Farida felt something shift inside her. Not relief, not excitement. Something deeper, purpose. Over the following weeks, Farida began to step into a new life. Not one handed to her, but one she helped build. Al-Haji Sadiq introduced her to several of his outreach programs, initiatives focused on food distribution, shelter support, and community care. At first, Farida observed, learning how things worked, understanding the structure behind the generosity. But it didn't take long before she became more than just an observer. She became part of it. She spoke to people, listened to their stories, offered help where she could, and slowly she began to shape her own approach. She insisted on being present not just behind the scenes, but on the ground where people needed to feel seen. "Food is important," she said once to Alhaji Sadiq, "but dignity matters too." He nodded. "You are learning quickly," he replied. But in truth, she wasn't learning something new. She was returning to who she had always been. Across the city, the Bellows household faced a different reality. The pressure did not ease. If anything, it grew. Contracts remained suspended. Investors withdrew, and the bank followed through on its warning. One by one, assets were reviewed, restricted, and in some cases, reclaimed. The house that once stood as a symbol of stability now felt uncertain, fragile. Mama Zainab tried to hold it together, to maintain control, but even she could not deny the shift. For the first time in years, she was no longer the one in power. Yusuf changed too, not overnight, not completely, but noticeably. He spoke less, listened more, and for the first time, he began to question the choices he had made, not because he had to, but because he finally understood their cost. One afternoon, weeks later, Farida stood in a small community center helping distribute food. Children laughed nearby, their voices light, unburdened. A woman approached her, holding a small child. "Thank you," she said, "for seeing us." Farida smiled gently. "You matter," she replied. The words felt simple, but they carried everything she had learned, everything she had lived. As the day came to an end, Farida stepped outside the sun, low in the sky. Alhaji Sadiq stood nearby, watching. "You've done well," he said. Farida shook her head slightly. "I'm just doing what I can," she replied. He looked at her thoughtfully. "That is more than most people ever do." Farida glanced around, at the people, at the space, at the life she had stepped into. Then she looked back at him. "Thank you," she said. He inclined his head. "You earned this," he replied. Farida smiled softly. For the first time in a long time, she believed it. That evening, as she returned home, Farida paused by the gate, the same kind of gate she had once stood behind, the same kind that had separated her from someone in need. She placed her hand against it briefly, then let it fall. Because now, she stood on the other side, not above, not beyond, but aware. And that awareness would guide everything she did from this moment forward. Farida stepped inside, not as someone seeking acceptance, but as someone who had found her place. And in doing so, she had found herself. Sometimes life does not reward us immediately for doing what is right. Sometimes kindness is met with rejection, silence, or even punishment. Farida's story reminds us of a truth that many people forget in a world driven by status and power. Who you are matters more than what you have. She gave when she had little. She stood firm when it cost her everything. And even when she lost her home, her comfort, and the people she thought would stand beside her, she did not lose herself. That is where her real strength lived. The world often tests us in quiet ways, not with grand choices, but with small moments. Do we ignore the person in need? Do we stay silent when someone is treated unfairly? Or do we choose to act even when it's uncomfortable? Farida chose to act. And in doing so, she changed not only her own life, but the lives of others around her. Alhaji Sadiq did not reward her because she helped him. He stood beside her because she revealed something rare. A heart that does not change even under pressure, a character that remains steady even when no one is watching. And that is something no amount of wealth can buy. If this story touched you, take a moment to reflect. Have you ever been in a situation where doing the right thing cost you something, or where someone's kindness changed your life? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe stories like this matter, stories that remind us of humanity, compassion, and truth, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change everything.